Hi guys, welcome to our channel. Here we share the experiences of people from around the world who have had near-death experiences. Please support us by sharing our videos and help spread awareness to your friends so they can appreciate the opportunities in life more. We hope this channel brings light, hope, and love to all of us. Thank you to everyone who supports us on this journey. I walked around the front of the building where there was a payphone attached. What I hadn't realized was that a storm cloud had blown up over the lake. We were right next to the lake, so I walked over to the phone to call my mom. I put in the code and was trying to get her on the line when I heard a huge crack and saw a big flash of light coming out of the phone. It hit me right in the face and threw me back like a rag doll. I fully expected that when you die, something would happen to let you know. Bells, whistles, who knows what. But there wasn't anything like that. It was just a very natural progression from being in one state 1 second to being someplace else the next. I went from being in a physical form to being in a physical form to being in a spiritual form. I grew up in Kingston, New York, and lived there for my first 18 years. I had gotten into some trouble in my last year. In my last year of high school, I got into some trouble. Stupid things that teenagers do. My high school football coach had attended the Citadel, a military school in South Carolina, and suggested to my father that I needed some mild corrections. I remember my father saying, "You can go to any school you want to, but if you don't go to the Citadel, don't come home." That made the choice pretty simple, so I went to the Citadel. I played football there and earned my degree in biology. In my last year at the Citadel, I had the honor of working with Albert Sent, Georgi, a Nobel Prize winner, who had defined the way muscles work. That experience made me realize what I wanted to do with my life. I envisioned myself as one of the lab rats working in the basement of a big institution, learning all kinds of great things. So, I decided to go to graduate school, where I spent the next 5 years earning my doctorate in physiology with a minor in biophysics. When I graduated, there were no jobs. A lot of people had gone to graduate school to avoid the Vietnam War, and when the war ended, there was a glut of feats entering the job market. As a result, there were no real good jobs available. I realized I needed to make another decision, so I decided to go to medical school. At the end of my studies, I had to decide what kind of physician I wanted to be. I settled on orthopedics because I loved taking things apart, putting them back together, and rebuilding things. I think my Italian heritage played a role, as I probably had some carpentry genes buried in there. In 1994, my wife organized a communal birthday party for 5 people in our family who had birthdays in August. Every year, we would have a big celebration, and that year they chose a place called Sleepy Hollow Lake. There were pavilions you could rent by the lake, and she rented one that could hold 25 or more people. That was going to be our august get-together. I was given the job of running the barbecue, so I was outside getting the food ready, while most everyone else was upstairs in the pavilion. At the beginning of the day, it was beautiful outside. The sun was shining, the temperature was pleasant, and everything seemed perfect. At some point, I decided to call my mom to check on her since she wasn't able to be there. By this time, my dad had already passed, so my mom was alone, and I wanted to see how she was doing. I got someone to cover the barbecue and walked around to the front of the building where there was a payphone attached. What I hadn't realized was that a storm cloud had blown up over the lake. Being right next to the lake, I walked over to make the call. I put in the code and tried to get her on the payphone. I let it ring 5, 6, 7 times, but she didn't pick up. I thought she must be busy and decided I would try again later. Just as I started to take the phone away from my ear to hang it up, I heard a huge crack and saw a big flash of light come out of the phone. It hit me right in the face and threw me back like a rag doll. As I was thrown back, I had the strangest sensation of moving forward. I remember standing there thinking, this doesn't make any sense. I knew I had seen the lightning, knew I'd been hit, and knew I'd been thrown backward, but now I was standing there and nothing made sense. The phone was dangling and I was just standing there, absolutely bewildered. At that point, I heard my mother-in-law screaming. She was at the top of the stairs and I was at the bottom. She started running down the stairs toward me, and I thought, this can't be good when your mother-in-law is running at you screaming that something's bad. As she got down in front of me, she was looking off to her left. It was really strange. It was like I wasn't even there. I was standing there thinking, what the hell? I turned to follow where she was going and took about 3 steps before I ran into myself on the ground. It hit me. I was dead. The realization was a shock. I had always expected that when you died, there would be some sort of signal, bells, whistles, something to let you know. But there wasn't. It was just a very natural progression. 1 second I was in a physical form, and the next second I was in a spiritual form. A lady who had been waiting to use the phone got down and started performing Ki. I was standing there, trying to call out to anyone who would listen. I could see and hear everyone, but nobody could see or hear me. It then occurred to me that I was thinking exactly as I normally would. I was in complete control of my mind, thinking in the same vernacular and manner as always. I was thinking as I normally would, but with massive racing thoughts, trying to make sense of the situation. It dawned on me that whoever I am, I always am, and there's no such thing as death. My spirit, or whoever I was, is eternal. That was the first significant realization that came to me as this unfolded. My spirit is here forever. We're essentially 2 beings. Our physical body, which is just a costume over who we truly are, and our eternal spirit. When I looked at my body, I felt very dispassionate about it. It was like, that's me, but it's not. I was still who I always was, and my body was nothing but an empty shell. This realization was earth-shaking, but not frightening. It was very matter of fact. This is the way things really are. Then I thought, well, there's no point in standing here because nobody can see me or hear me. I turned around and started to walk toward the stairs to check on my family. As I ascended, I got to about the 3rd step and noticed my legs beginning to dissolve. I thought, okay, this is getting really weird. By the time I reached the top of the stairs, I had lost all form and was just a ball of energy. At the top of the 1st level, the stairs continue a few steps to the left, but I didn't bother with that since I had no form. I simply went through the wall. On the other side, I found myself right over the top of my wife, who was painting children's faces. I took a mental picture of who was there, which kids were present, how the furniture was arranged, and the order the kids were standing in. This became important later when we compared notes, and I was able to verify everything I saw, confirming that I had truly been there. I continued through the room, and when I got out, I went through the roof. It was like I had suddenly fallen into a river of pure, positive energy. A bluish-white light emanated from this energy. If you can imagine an energy completely composed of love and peace, with no other emotions or senses, that's what it felt like. It was earth-shaking to experience so much love and peace coming from this source. I realized this must be the God energy, the force that makes everything. I thought, this is the greatest thing that could ever happen to someone, to have this realization and to feel this way. It was the only time in my life I had ever experienced anything like it. At that point, I realized I was going somewhere. I started to see a collage of high points and low points in my life. There wasn't much explanation or thought, just pictures of my life's moments. I saw different moments in my life, high points, low points, trauma, and everything in between. I was just settling into the flow of this stream of energy, not knowing where it was taking me, but feeling excited and almost ecstatic. The feeling was wonderful, like a state of bliss. Then all of a sudden, it was like someone flipped a switch. Suddenly, I was in pain and back in my body. I was calling out in my head, begging whoever would listen, "Please don't make me do this. I don't want to go back." Despite loving my wife and 3 kids in my life, there was no comparison to what I had experienced outside my body. I was angry and desperate to stay where I was because I had gone from absolute bliss to absolute pain. The spots where the energy hit me in the face and exited my foot felt like 2 hot pokers. I realized it wasn't my choice to stay. The lady who had been doing Kipiya had stopped and was now kneeling next to me. It took several minutes before I regained consciousness enough to open my eyes. When I did, everything was very blurry. I wanted to thank the lady who had been performing Kipiya, but all that came out was, "I'm a doctorate, you know." It felt like such a silly thing to say. I realized then that my thinking wasn't clear, so I decided to just stay quiet and wait it out. Of course, everyone rushed over, calling an ambulance and the police. I really didn't want to spend 4 to 6 hours in the emergency room just to be told I was alive, so I opted to go home instead. I called my cardiologist and neurologist friends, who came over immediately or met me at their offices. They all said the same thing. I was lucky to be alive. After my near-death experience, I was afraid to talk about it with anyone. This happened in the early 90s. After that experience, I was cautious about discussing it openly because I feared someone might question my sanity and jeopardize my professional standing. I confided in friends and family, but otherwise kept quiet to avoid being labeled as unstable. Before the lightning strike, I was focused on academic orthopedics, aiming to publish papers and chairing a significant spine meeting each year. However, after the incident, none of those pursuits seemed as important. I felt lost and questioned why I had gone through such an ordeal, as it didn't make sense to me. Then, unexpectedly, I developed an intense craving for classical piano music. This was a significant departure for me, having grown up in the 60s with rock and roll as my main musical interest. Now, I found myself consumed by a desire to immerse myself in classical piano music. It was such a strong feeling that I drove to Albany, the nearest place with classical piano CDs. I vividly recall walking into the store and having a CD of Vladimir Ashkenazy playing his favorite Chopin practically leap into my hands. It felt like fate, so I bought it immediately and started listening. I was utterly captivated, unable to stop playing the CD on repeat all day long. Shortly after, I realized just listening to the music wasn't enough. I felt an intense need to learn how to play it myself. The only problem was, I didn't own a piano and didn't know how to play. I was pondering my next move when, serendipitously, one of our babysitters visited and mentioned she was moving. She asked if she could store her old upright piano at our house for a while. I couldn't believe the timing. I agreed without hesitation. The next day, the piano arrived, and despite my lack of experience, I was determined to learn. It marked the beginning of my journey into classical piano, a journey that would profoundly change my life. A year passed, and I found it odd that just a day after realizing I needed a piano, one appeared at my doorstep. I started teaching myself how to play, and a couple of weeks into my practice, I had a vivid dream. In the dream, I walked onto a stage and saw myself playing in a grand concert hall. It struck me that the music I was playing was not someone else's. It was mine. The dream ended with a powerful crescendo that woke me up abruptly at 3:15 in the morning. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I couldn't shake the dream's impact. I went to the piano and tried to reproduce the notes I heard, but lacking knowledge of music theory or how to write music, I quickly grew frustrated and returned to bed. However, from that moment onward, whenever I sat at the piano, the music from my dream would effortlessly flow through me, guiding my fingers on the keys. The music from my dreams consumed me constantly. Ignoring it was futile. It would unexpectedly start playing in my mind, disrupting my focus during surgeries and other tasks. It felt like a force inside me, more powerful than I could comprehend. The very next day, I set out to find a program that could teach me how to write music. I discovered a program called Sibelius, designed as an introductory tool for music composition. With Sibelius, I began to transcribe the music from my dreams onto paper. For the next 7 months, every spare minute I had was devoted to this pursuit. I developed an obsession with music. I woke up at 4:30 am and practiced until 6:30 am before heading to work. After long days that stretched to 12 or 14 hours, I returned home to put my kids to bed. Once they were settled, I returned to the piano and played until midnight or later. During this time, I was completely enthralled by the music and the piano. Nothing else seemed to matter. The outside world faded away as I pursued this newfound passion. Music for me serves as a gateway to an almost euphoric state, bringing me as close to the feeling of being on the other side as possible. It's as if there's a connection I can tap into, a frequency that resonates deeply within me. When I read about other composers, especially the greats like Mozart, they often describe their music as coming to them in finished form, as if they were merely transcribing it from another source. Many philosophers and thinkers have speculated that our brains act as receivers, rather than containers of all knowledge. They suggest there's an external source, or dimension, from which we draw information and inspiration. This idea aligns with beliefs about life after death, that our existence in this form is temporary, and after we depart, we transition into something else. It suggests a continuous cycle of existence, where we evolve spiritually through different phases and perhaps reincarnate into new forms or beings. This concept reflects a broader continuum of existence where learning and spiritual growth are ongoing processes across different states of being. To me, life is a journey of healing and understanding, spanning our present experiences and what we aim to work on in future lives. We're here to learn, to gain new experiences, and to spiritually evolve into higher beings than we are now. In my view, everyone has the potential to return to the source, but it's something you must earn through spiritual growth. I see existence as a series of proving grounds where we experientially develop and evolve. There are two fundamental polarities, positive and negative. Moving along the positive path involves service to others, while the negative path is centered on service to self. By focusing on service to others in our daily lives, we enhance our spiritual growth and move closer to rejoining with the source from which everything originated. My near-death experience was the most profound event in my life. It gave me a glimpse of what comes after death. Death, I learned, should not be feared. It's simply a transition to a different form of existence. This understanding has profoundly shaped my perspective on life and spirituality. Before the lightning experience, my worldview was firmly rooted in science and the understanding of what constitutes reality. However, following that event, I've come to realize that our existence encompasses far more than we can comprehend. If everyone could undergo a similar experience before their passing, it would profoundly shift their perspective on life and the purpose of our journey here. Such an awakening has the potential to revolutionize our understanding of existence and fundamentally alter how we approach life's challenges and opportunities.